Good evening, everybody. I thought I'll say a few words today about something that I've already mentioned a number of times on my blog, but I thought I'll just talk about it personally in this studio that I've created. And it is about the failure of most economists and all libertarians / anarcho-capitalists to really understand what is the practical way to maximize liberty and therefore good governance as well. So what I think economists who fail to look at governance they have kind of a blind spot, it seems to me. And I've been watching a lot of economists. I won't name them at this point in time because they are good economists otherwise. But they all have one unique failure in mind, which is that they do not understand that there is a huge process involved, a democratic process and a process of bargaining and a process of across government views and coalescing all this information, number one. Number two, the layers of accountability and reporting and all that stuff which happens in order to get anything done. A simple thing like a road, a simple thing like a town hall, a simple thing, a public park can require enormous amount of political and economic incentives to be understood. What economists have done is they've looked at the markets pretty well. And they are pretty good at that, explaining markets. And then, of course, they have failures in understanding, the fact that monopolies are not really a problem, for example, in most cases. So some of them have a simplistic view even about markets. So let's not worry about those who are the really poor economists. And of course, we have the macroeconomists who have really no idea about the markets at all. And they're simply looking at data and thinking that the data will tell them something about the world, which is complete false. So there's a vast area surrounding the economy. In fact, the markets generally cannot function without a really effective functioning government. This is a precondition to markets. It's pretty obvious to everybody who knows about how markets work that you need to have a place. In many cases, you need to have regulations, and you have to have infrastructure and many other things that are not really available without the government's involvement. So markets are dependent on a good government, and that's one of the reasons why you see great prosperity in countries where they have good governance. And so most economists have spent a lot of time really looking at that side, but they've forgotten about what exactly is government doing, and why then why are some governments so really bad, like for example India. So that's about the failure of the economists in brief, and I won't go into details there, but that's their blind spot. They've got something, public choice theory, collective action, and a few other studies in this area, but they're very, very sketchy, and they simply do not drill down into the details. And therefore, the field of public administration, I feel, is extremely important in understanding reality. And new public management is actually effectively a branch of good economics. So they've taken some lessons from economics and introduced them, but the economists as a whole really don't understand that. And therefore their advice, for example, World Bank, they may sit in the World Bank, for example, and I have somebody in mind, but I will not name anybody here now. These people are busy advising the world about how to do things, but they really don't know how it works. So I'm sorry, but their advice is pointless and therefore wasted, and they're being paid good money, which is of not really any use to anybody. So that's the sad situation about economists who really don't understand governance. The other side is really the political side. Economists are not really into politics, so most of them are simply sitting out there earning a livelihood of some sort, academia, or maybe in the government, etc. But then there are these libertarians or anarcho-capitalists. Some of them are academics, that's true, but a good number of them are actually political. And they're all trying to run, some kind of libertarian political party or some such thing. Anarcho-capitalists obviously don't even run that. They're against the idea of even a political party. But let's think about the libertarians. And the libertarians have this very huge blind spot. about the government again. What else? They know the markets. They believe in. They actually have a faith in markets. So they kind of like believers. They have the same passion as any religious believer, a fervent religious believer would have. They just believe in the markets, and therefore anything and everything can be solved through the markets. And that's complete nonsense, and it never actually works and cannot work. And I say that even though I'm a very strong proponent of market solutions, market-based solutions, but I'm very clear about one thing, that without a very good background of excellent government and governance arrangements and regulation and all that necessary stuff, and regulation should be minimal. I'm not saying you need regulation for the sake of regulation. I'm sort of talking very minimalistic. But it is a structure that does support. It's like the foundation of the market. If you don't have that, the markets cannot really do what they're supposed to do. That's not true in all cases. So don't generalize to thinking that I'm actually talking about some socialism or some such thing. No, I'm actually talking about a very scientific way of analyzing where exactly, for example, just take a simple example. The other day I had a phone company gypped me $30, very small amount of money. I had to change my SIM card with that company. I won't name the company, it's not necessary for this particular point. The point is that companies will cheat, and I've had this experience so many times and repeatedly. Private businesses will continuously try to cheat. Now many of them don't, because they know the repetition matters, but most of them will try, if they can, to cheat. By the way, everybody has got that tendency of opportunism. So it's not that just businesses do that, but it's a general human tendency, and that's part of the the first few assumptions of economics, and that's fine. I have no issues with that. But the point about this is that what happens if businesses are cheating and you have no recourse? So think about, for example, a builder, say 3,000 years ago, and this is why Hammurabi's laws come into being, where Hammurabi has a wonderful set of principles for builders who build defective houses. And if the house falls on the owner, on the person who commissioned the house, and the house is so bad it falls and kills the owner, then the builder shall be killed. And these are the kind of rules that were made by Hammurabi. But you see here what's going on. Builders will cheat, and so the list is quite extensive. And it's all about builders who cheat, builders who build badly, builders who potentially kill the owner, etc. Now, what is this going on here? So that's a market transaction, right, between one person and another person. But then the government or the king has to come in and try to redress the whole situation as part of the justice system. So there's a law, there's a regulation required to prevent it. Rather than having people build houses that are so bad that they keep falling, it is a good idea for the society to have regulations and to have supervision, so that the basic foundational things of a house are looked after and they're certified to be of good quality. So what we have done in this process is to not leave everything to the market. Markets are not they work very well, they should work very well in most cases, but there is this problem of cheating, there's a problem of quality control, there's a problem of many other things, and consumers then the citizens then suffer. So what these libertarians, and I've done this pretty extensive example, but let's get back to libertarians. What is the libertarians' problem and anarcho-capitalists' problem? What I find in them is extreme superficiality. They're just like rambling away and criticizing the rest of the world without having the slightest clue. And I really must use the word slightest clue. They have no clue about how really markets work in the real life. They've actually not even probably run a business of their own. Most people are so superficial. They've read a couple of books, that they've formed a view, they're politically very savvy, or they want to preach a lot and write blogs or write or whatever. And they're busy promoting the fact that markets will solve all problems on their own. And that's not true. And I know that markets can solve a lot of problems on their own. And I think that's the whole point. And I keep emphasizing that the insights of, say, Walter Block, that roads should be totally privatized. Now, that's a good objective to have. You can privatize roads completely, but for that you need to have a certain regulatory framework. and on that, and technologies. And so once you have all those things in place, by all means, delegate it back to the market. There's no need for any government intervention or supervision. But so the value, I think, that the classical liberal view brings to the table is that it is a very scientific discipline. What I bring, through my studies in economics and governance, is I bring some really practical solutions to real problems. These are things that can actually make a dramatic improvement in the quality of lives of people. Whereas the World Bank economists are simply hopeless and they can do nothing of any use to anybody because they don't understand governance. They have no experience of governance. They've not really worked in any government anywhere. They don't understand the whole process. And this is, by the way, very interesting. You do not get to see government until you work inside government. Governments are extraordinary closed entities. Whether in India or here in Australia where I work, they're extraordinarily closed entities. There's a cabinet. There's called confidentiality. Almost every discussion that occurs within government is so confidential. It's never discussed outside. So if you're a consultant and you're talking to a government officer, be sure that that's actually not the final decision. The final decision is taken through another process of complete confidential discussions, which evaluates the work of your consultancy, but then forms its own view on behalf of the whole society. I mean, I'm just talking about the fact that without this direct experience of governance, without the experience of the incentives at work, without the experience of the entire mechanics of how you can actually support markets effectively, you're not fit enough to advise. So the World Bank has hired a lot of useless economists. They're good academics, but they're pretty useless in terms of advising government. They might as well advise, write a couple of papers in the academic journals, which is good. They're good at that. But they're hopeless at this exercise of advising governments. And that is why things like World Banks have continuously failed, because these guys have no experience of working within these, advanced governments and so on. And some of them may have, but they're not really economists. And so we have a very big problem. For example, the things that are very obvious to me in India, such fundamental reforms are required in governance. I've not heard a single World Bank report talk about that. How shameful is this? The entire economics discipline does not have the kind of expertise to advise a country like India about how to fix its governance system. Once you fix the governance system, and then you can have private schools, private hospitals, private roads, private everything. By all means, private railways, everything private. But before that, you need to have a fantastic governance system. What I think is this is a scientific exercise. Anyone who sort of comes with an ideological, I'm an ideologue. We have an ideology, Swarn Bharat Party, that liberty is really important, and it is important. But the ideological approach must be tempered with real expertise in the detailed mechanics of incentives. I always keep saying that incentives are like the atoms, or actually within the atoms, the protons and neutrons and the electrons and the whole forces, and that's what is the incentives at work. And everywhere these incentives are at work. Everywhere you look, there are incentives at work. The ability to understand these incentives, which are quite invisible, and to see what they might do, and then to make sure that you have the right incentives so that the people do what they're supposed to do, that's quite an art. That's quite a skill. It's not something that comes naturally to just because you've learned some PhD in economics or some other thing. You really need to understand governance. So I think that the failure of economists that I keep talking about, and the failure of libertarians, and particularly libertarian economists, anarchists, is a fundamental issue, a problem to the world. These disciplines are too narrow. They're either very focused on the markets, or they're focused on ideology. They're just like believers in religion. I think it's time for these guys to really start getting real. Look at both sides of the equation. Look at when and how should governance be established so that markets can function. So that's the condition. You should not be looking at, in macroeconomics, I remember, the Lucas model that we had about where the government is considered a total waste. Now, government is not a waste. I think government, yes, a lot of money is spent on government, but that's not supposed to be a waste. That is supposed to provide you the framework in which you can operate without getting cheated. You can do the right thing. You can have the freedoms, and you can have all those good things. But you have justice. You have all those other qualities that are required in order to support an effective economy. So the governments are not a waste, but excessive government is bad, but also ineffective government is really bad. And what we have in India is a small, and it's actually not a very big government in terms of GDP compared to the, let's say, the West, but it's very ineffective and incompetent. So India's problem is a governance problem at the root, and unfortunately, none of these economists that famous economists, and none of the libertarians, I'm sorry, have the slightest clue. So that's probably the summary of what I had to say. I've already said it in my blog many times, and I can explain more if anybody has any questions. All right, thanks.